Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm sitting across via Zoom with Nadia Last. My name is Sam Fotenhauer, and today we're talking about one of my favorite topics in the entire world, a huge part of my personality as well, which is the emotional wave, the solar plexus, which is the center in human design that defines emotions, that houses emotions. And most of this episode, candidly, is about emotional health, which is probably my actual favorite topic, emotional regulation and finding a relationship with your emotions. Nadia, how are you doing today emotionally?
I'm like already feeling all the feels. We're going to get into some very real examples
Mhm.
from our lives, from our work. Today, it's going to be a very emotionally open and honest conversation. But before we get into updates, Sam, I actually want to share the biggest update for Moonrise right now, which
Okay.
is that we have our only live cohort of human design training that starts the Wednesday after Labor Day, so September 4th. It's a 16-week deep dive into all of the facets of human design. We've had a tremendous interest in this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you're listening and you love learning from Sam and I, we would love to have you. We want you. And the price of this training is $1,750, so $1,750, and it goes up August 1st, I
August
believe.
1st.
August
Mhm.
1st. And so if you're interested in joining this training, we would love to have you. The cohort that's assembling is already so wonderful with so much spiritual and emotional intentionality. It's going to be intimate. You're really going to get to know Sam and I and join in our community. And it's truly one of our greatest ways to meet people. Meeting with us every Wednesday night, 2.5 hours. Like it's a ride.
It's a ride. And it's a commitment, but it's very fulfilling. It's not just about human design. Like everybody who's here loves human design, but a lot of people join because they feel something else. Like they just feel a nudge to be here. They want to dive in to the spiritual waters and in depth and connection with us too. And I was going back, I was creating some materials and going back and reading our or our reflection forms from past participants because Nadia and I have taught this 3 rounds before. So we've taught many hundreds of hours of human design material. We had this pretty dialed. We have the length and the time because we've done a bunch of rounds. So we've gotten to learn from it. And I was reminded by all these amazing reflections by people saying, like, this was one of the most transformative experiences that they had, that it truly changed who they were and changed parts of their lives because they got to connect much more deeply with themselves. It was healing to connect with others and community. They got to learn from others and it inspired them emotionally, spiritually, educationally. It's one thing we consistently hear is it's much more than just a human design class, but it also is that. So there's a bunch of great content. You're going to learn a ton. You should come, or you should hit us up and ask any questions. We'd be happy to just talk to you about it so you can feel into it more.
Ask yourself how you feel learning about human design. Do you feel this electrifying, enlivening, enlightening feeling of connectedness to yourself? Do you feel this inspiration for life, this connection to your inner instincts? And that is basically what you receive on a weekly basis with other people who are also electrified by this information. And it's really a transmission. So if you're feeling the nudge, we would love, love, love to have you.
I'm really glad you said that, Nadia, because it reminded me of when I took my first human design course. And I was like, this is silly. Like, I was practicing law full time. I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm never going to share this. But I just loved learning it so much that I was like, whatever. I just love this so much. Like, what a great use of my time to spend doing what I love. And then I was, of course, surprised that it opened up a lot for me. Anyway, Nadia, anything else you want to say on that before we get into it?
No, that just it's the last time that we're going to teach it this year. So if you really
Yes.
want to join us live, we would love to have you.
Or almost certainly next year too, live.
Yeah.
And so if you want to join it live, um, which is great because then you can ask us questions, join us. Okay. So today we're talking about the solar plexus. The solar plexus is one of the 9 centers in human design. And I just want to flag that it has a different meaning than the solar plexus in the chakra system. And so you can put aside your knowledge of that for those of you who study the chakra system. The solar plexus is the center. So the centers are like hubs of energy. When you pull up your chart, if you don't have your chart, go to moonrisecommunity.com, pull your chart, and you'll see these different shapes. So like 9 different shapes, and some of them are colored in and some of them are white. And that's your reflector, in which they're all white. The solar plexus is on the right side towards the bottom. It's a sideways triangle. And you'll see numbers in it that say 6, 49, 55, 30, 37. There's a bunch of different numbers in there. And yours will either be colored in which case your authority will be emotional, or it'll be not colored in. It'll be white, in which you are a different authority. You could be a sacral, a splenic, a self projected. There's a number of other options. All the different centers are like energy hubs, so they all have different themes. And this theme is all about emotions, passion, and desire. So, this is how we process, connect, and experience our emotions.
Yeah, there's a lot of different themes that are highlighted in the solar plexus: passion, desire, but also conflict and intimacy and connection with others. There's so crisis, being able to manage crisis and navigate moments of crisis. There's so much interesting energy in the solar plexus. And whether you have it colored in, defined, meaning you are creating your own emotional energy within yourself and sharing it outwardly all the time, or whether you are undefined, meaning it's white, it's not colored in, and you have an inconsistent access to that emotional energy. Sam and I are both going to share from both perspectives today. That's one of the greatest things about learning from Moonrise Human Design, is that Sam and I have nearly opposite definition in our charts. So we're really speaking to the different perspectives. And Sam, I'm so happy to have you here talking about the solar plexus, because as our resident defined emotional wave human here, you inspire me so much. I work with so many people and witness so many people who experience big things and either keep it to themselves, super buried, or it comes out in ways that they don't intend it to, and it causes harm to themselves or others. You are perhaps the single most emotionally responsible person I think I've met. And that sounds dramatic to say, but I mean, in pure defined solar plexus fashion. But it really is true. I have so much confidence being your friend and your business partner, because I know everything that you feel, you take radical accountability for, and really don't ignore a single feeling. Like, you really spend time getting curious with it.
Thank you, Nadia. And I agree. Believe that I'm a master with my emotions. And it's something that I'm very proud of, because I didn't used to always be like this. I actually used to be rather chaotic with my emotions, and I undermined a lot of relationships because of it, which is part of why I know how important it is. It's also why I can not hold a lot of judgment on other people, because I know how that can happen. I understand it. I see it. I used to be it. And at the same time, I believe it's each person's responsibility to develop their relationship with their emotions, to get the support that they need so they can work through the experiences that live within them, so they don't have their emotions don't have to come out, in ways to learn the tools that they need to. And this is true for people who have a defined emotional center, emotional authority, or others, because regardless of how human design reflects your emotions, every human being has emotions, and every human being can express their emotions in a dysfunctional way that undermines relationships, that undermines their relationship with themselves, that causes conflict or hurt, or isolation. And every human being can have a vibrant and healthy and safe way of expressing emotions. And it is a both journey and a practice. And it's worth it. It's super, super worth it. My life has gotten a lot better. I have so much more self trust, because I trust myself to navigate emotions. And I have a lot, I've personally developed the relationship, maybe we can come back to this later, of safety in emotions. And my developing a relationship with your emotions will give you a feeling of trusting yourself, a confidence, a safety, an ability to form really meaningful relationships in the world, to create, like, take the action that you need to, and to navigate challenges and pain so much better.
Mm. Can you, just so people feel a little bit less isolated and also less shame, Could you paint a picture of some examples in your life where perhaps you weren't in as much control of your emotions? Maybe they, I don't know if you describe it this way. Did you ever feel like your emotions controlled you?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I have two examples that are coming up. The first one is that I've spoken about this a lot on my podcast in early episodes, Wild River. Maybe not as much here, but I'm 31. So when I was in early college, like 18, 19, 20, I was a heavy drinker. I would binge drink regularly. We'd go out 3 or 4 times a week, total party girl. And in that heavy drinking, I would routinely have emotional meltdowns, like probably once a week, maybe even more, where I would
Wow.
end the night crying. Sometimes I would bring everyone into it and it would become a huge thing. I would get really mean to people around me. I would yell at them. Being drunk, would come up with insults that were really personal. So I always felt like I really meant them. It was really sad. And but I also sometimes would just be by myself alone, crying in my bed, feeling isolated or
Mm.
feeling like I couldn't connect. And all of that crying and that, like, it wasn't just because I was drinking fueled it, but it was just escalating something that was already there. Because then I moved to New Orleans and I still drank, and I didn't drink as heavily, but I was drinking often, and I'd never had meltdowns. It was escalating a level of disconnection that I felt from people around me. And I was feeling like not accepted and not connected. And so then I would get drunk. And then if I had experiences where I didn't feel connected, or like it almost put like what are the Sherlock Holmes where you look see
Magnifying
a
glass.
magnifying glass on my insecurity, then I would react in a way to hurt other people or to make them feel bad. And so that was something that was pretty typical. It felt typical to me. I may be remembering it with like, it may not be as often as I thought, but I think it was happening quite a bit. I definitely was crying often. The second thing where I was sober, but it really came up, is I would get into political fights with people all the time, which is really interesting because I haven't gotten into a political fight in a long time. But I would get very triggered with people who held a different point of view than me, and it would feel like a personal attack on my identity. And when someone would say, like, they don't agree with some policy or something, um, and it wasn't always just like the heavy hitters. Like, I was a lawyer too. So it could be like a random fiscal policy or like a random environmental policy or something. And I would take it as either attack on me and attack on other people. And I would sometimes I felt like I can think of examples where I derailed the entire dinner or a long car ride with just an extremely passionate but erratic and chaotic response. And the other person would usually be getting dysregulated too. So we'd be like feeding off of each other, going up and up. And then some people would maybe participate or just shut down or remove themselves. Yeah, I'll leave it at those two.
Yeah. I just want people listening because there's so much shame, and I might call it an emotional hangover that people will
Mhm.
feel if their emotions get so big and they act in ways that they immediately regret, or, sometime afterward regret, where it's like, why did I say that? Why did I act that way? Like, it felt so intense in the moment. I was actually talking to a client yesterday. She's like, I feel like a Hulk came out of
Mhm.
me, and the Hulk was smashing emotionally, and then as soon as I came back to my normal self, I was like, I don't even recognize the person that I was. But in that moment, my emotions were so big that they got in front of me.
That's such a great description. I can like viscerally feel that, of like emotions getting so big. When I was 3 years old, this is like a funny story, but it's also like an example. I was really mad at my mom, and so I took scissors and I cut off my eyelashes because I wanted to hurt her because she had really long eyelashes and she loved them. And which is and they grew back and everything was fine. Obviously, she was just horrified that I had scissors so close to my eyes. But I also think it's an example of having a really big emotion, so much so that it takes over everything, and responding to it in a really destructive way. And I can think of these times, even like within a few years ago, like not that long ago, with getting into a fight over something else. Often it was made worse if I was hungry or tired, and fully going off the rails, like sobbing, screaming. And it's like, I like left my body and am replaced with this other version of myself. And it feels terrible. And then you don't trust yourself. You start to believe at my core, I'm unkind at, because in those moments, you often go low. Like you go to hurt somebody, you say something unkind, you dredge up things. You're trying to manipulate, like there's something. So I started to believe like at my core, I'm unkind because that's what's really coming out,
Mm.
which isn't true for anyone out there. You're not unkind at your core. You're hurt, and that hurt is taking over the steering wheel.
Yeah. It's like taking the hurt that's inside and kind of like spraying it outside of oneself in an attempt to regulate, because that's really what it is, I think, is when such big emotions happen. It's like I need to find any way to get this out of me in a way that will bring me back to a neutral, stable, balanced place. And I think it's really important that we're talking about this today because shame is another emotion, but that shame is what actually keeps us stuck in patterns of behavior that aren't serving us. It's that feeling of like, I am at my core a bad person. I am so ashamed that I acted this way. I'm so ashamed that I don't even want to look at this quality of myself. So I think just talking about it, and I love and I'm so grateful for how generously you're sharing your emotionally dysregulated years, because it will hopefully help people find themselves in your story and be like, okay, I'm not alone in this. I am getting barreled by my emotional waves right now, but I really do want to learn how to get on top of it and start to surf.
And it's absolutely possible. Like it's absolutely possible. And then you can live out the beautiful parts is the same people who are that angry can be like wildly laughing, later that day or the next day and have this amazing joy. And it's like when you have those big emotions, that also means you have this great capacity for other emotions. And so there are gifts to it. I'd like to also, Nadia, take a moment to talk about the other side of emotional dysregulation, which is fully shutting down. And so there might be others, you can have an emotional wave or not, that have this pattern where rather than having this big yelling like I used to, you actually get very small within yourself and you push everything down. Nadia, could you share any like examples of just anonymized examples of what this could look like?
Yes. I was talking with someone, a client today actually, who is a manifester, and they were talking about how they showed up for their partner and their child for many, many years. And they're trying to get more in touch with their manifestor urges, which is a natural part of human design. Go listen to our manifestor deep dive if you want to learn more about it. But they were really talking about not actually knowing what it is that they want to do with their day, let alone their life. They have a significant trip coming up. And we were talking about it, and I was like, I'm seeing almost like a pipe that's really rusty. And you haven't like asked for the water to come through this pipe in so many years. And all of a sudden you're tapping on the pipe like, hey, where's the water? Like I'm ready to have all this inspiration. But I'm like, you might be putting too much pressure on yourself. You've suppressed your needs and your voice and your boundaries for so long that we need to start small so that you can build up the trust within yourself to start bringing this back to the surface again for the big things.
That's a great example. And that's exactly what can happen. Like you can lose your knowing of where you want to go and all the other emotions, because all emotions can contain a lot of really helpful information.
Yes.
Another
Wait.
example, go ahead.
Oh, I have. Will you remember your example?
Absolutely.
I will also remember mine if you want to go first.
No, please go ahead.
I just got so excited. I
I
have
love
this
it.
couple that I'm seeing, and one person in the couple is realizing I didn't have any space for my emotions in childhood. And so they are actually having these big emotional outbursts now because they finally feel safe in their partnership to have them. However, the other partner is seen as the very stable one, but actually that person has a ton of emotional depth within them as well. They just don't have any space in the partnership to express them. So it's this really complicated dynamic of if you don't have space to express your emotions, once you learn how to do them and bring them back up, it might feel like a fire hydrant that gets kind of like opened up all of a sudden. It's like your emotions are stuck at age 3 or whenever it is that you felt like you had to shut off the spigot. And then in your partnership, if one person has all this space to just kind of like emote, 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 that means that the other partner might actually have to take up less and less and less space and be viewed as the non emotional one when really there's just no space for it.
Absolutely. And this is a dynamic that can happen all the time. It can happen within siblings or parent child. If a parent had a big emotions, there may not have been space. And so you learned I'm not emotional. or it's not safe to be emotions, but actually there's a ton of emotions within. But your coping mechanism may have been to keep everything under lock. Signs of this can be if someone starts expressing emotionally, not even aggressively, but just even like sincerely and grounded, if it's really uncomfortable for you, or you feel like you need to kind of like harden or close or exit, a part of you just wants to leave right away, that can be a sign that there's more emotions in there to look at. If it feels that whenever somebody's emotional, that it's your fault, like they're subliminally saying it's your fault, that's something to look at. There's more, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, I think that's great. Um, I also just want to point out that we're talking about emotions in Cancer season. And Cancer season is one of the three water seasons. So it's Scorpio, Pisces, and Cancer. And during Cancer season, we're brought into water as an element. And so this time of year, and there's three times of year where you might feel as though emotions are more naturally at the surface and ready thematically to be processed on a collective level. And so I just think it's a really beautiful time for us to be discussing this, Sam, because you may feel listening to this like, wow, as I'm reflecting on it, the last couple weeks actually have felt more emotionally open than I usually feel, whether you have a defined emotional wave or not.
I agree. And this may, I can't remember the timing. This may even come out in Leo season, but I think Leo season also, even though it's a fire sign, brings up a lot of emotions because there's a lot of passion and fiery
Mm-hmm.
energy in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you may experience it. Emotions have a way of coming out when they want to anyway. And so you may have been really effective at turning off your emotions for a while, but they'll find you at some point in your life. And if you wait for that, you'll likely feel a little bit out of control. Like, I'm not choosing this, and that can be a hard experience. Or you may also feel, I wish I didn't wait so long to learn how to work with these because I had to give up a lot in the interim.
Yeah. I've had the experience over the last couple of weeks of being kind of snippy and short with my partner, Scott. We love you, Scott. And feeling a little bit withdrawn from him. And he had a dream about me, kind of like completely withdrawing. And we love talking about dreams and the subconscious and what it reveals about what we're thinking about and the deeper meanings of things, etc. And he was talking to me in the morning and he's like, I think it's because I felt more distant from you. And I was shocked to hear that he felt that way. And I was like, that's so interesting. I haven't felt that I've been acting any differently. But it really, I think that people don't recognize sometimes that the deeper wells of whatever it is that you're experiencing can often be masked by low grade irritability or annoyance or shortness. And so even if you don't actually feel like there's anything deep down, starting to see the like kind of more surface level symptomology that shows you there's actually deeper wells available to be felt.
Absolutely. That's a great, I love that example, Nadia. And I love that you shared that. Thank you for sharing that with us. I can think of a time where I was really stressed and overwhelmed. And I remember my mom, I was taking the New York bar exam. And I remember my mom told me later, like, you were such a monster. Like, you were so mean every time I talked to you. And I didn't remember any of that. Like, I was like, really? And I was like, I'm not surprised, but I wouldn't have even noticed. And that's another thing with emotions is that they're tricky, and we can, because of that shame piece, it we can be really good at concealing like the way we're acting to others until we can step in, one, being open to hearing other people and then taking that information and then doing something with it.
Totally. I was so dropped into what you were saying. I'm forgetting exactly what I wanted to say next. But it was something related to how we can kind of distract ourselves away or deny the truth of what we're experiencing. And it's slipping from me now, but I think I was just so present with this
Mm.
experience.
We'll
Yeah.
come back to it because I think another big way of self of regulation is being able to be quiet within yourself. There's like always jokes on the internet about like then I'd have to be quiet with my own thoughts, and like those are funny, but like I do think everyone needs to have that skill of being able
Mhm.
to be quiet for really long periods with your own thoughts and your
But
own emotions.
as you said that, I did think of it,
What
which
is
is
it?
just
Tell
that
me.
people think that time is like with emotions is very linear, and it's not. And so sometimes people come into therapy and be like, Nadia, I don't understand why I'm feeling this now. It's 20 years since this happened. And if what happens is if our body or nervous system is in fight or flight, if we feel sort of like we're being chased by a bear in the woods. Like we're just trying to get by, we're trying to survive, we're trying to make ends meet, whatever it is, the stresses in our lives. It might be that it takes until there's a pocket of calm in your life. Your relationship feels stable. Your child just left for college. Like there's just this feeling of like I'm resting now. I'm no longer running from the metaphorical bear. And now I can actually look at my body and see the gashes or the wounds that I sustained through this journey, and I can tend to them. It doesn't matter how much time has passed.
Yes, that's such an important point. Like you can process things from 50 years before. And I think it's really that's a huge part of how I think creates emotional regulation, emotional health is being willing to process anything. So you might need to process some frustration you had to a parent, which you can judge now and be like, whatever, that was such a small thing and they're just doing their best. And that was like 25 years ago. But actually you doing that can create the space to be able to have a relationship with them that isn't resentful and that is genuinely accepting and is exactly what you want it to be because you allowed yourself to cry at, some conversation that still plays in your head from when you were 6 and giving yourself that compassion, that grace, and that opportunity to be with it is so beneficial, even though it can feel like silly and it can actually feel shameful of like, it can bring up wounds of like, I should have dealt with this by now. Why am I so emotional? I'm being a brat. Like, I shouldn't care about this. And I encourage anybody who has those to be like, okay, I hear all those. I'm going to put you aside here and say, like, why do I remember this thing from when I'm 6 and it makes me cry?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's actually the only thing that matters. And being with it and then getting to the other side is going to release a lot. And I want to add one thing, Nadia, to the bear analogy and the fight or flight. Sometimes your body's in fight or flight, or it you may not realize it. So there might be pieces of you that are really calm, that things are really stable, but it wasn't till you entered in this romantic relationship or this friendship that an extra piece of safety came in, and it is with that safety that that emotion could finally unlock.
100,000,000%. So well said.
Should we get into the emotional wave?
Let's get into it.
Yeah. So everything we've talked about this far is is not exclusive to people with a defined emotional center. So just to repeat, we only mentioned it briefly. If you have an emotional authority, a defined emotional center, in this way, those things are interchangeable. The right triangle on the bottom is colored in. That means that you constantly have an emotional wave. It means that you have this motor. It's like a motor of a car, kind of, that is constantly generating energy. And you will wake up some days feeling like it's sunny inside and vibrant and so ready to go. And you'll wake up some days feeling a bit melancholy or very melancholy and feeling maybe slower or more like you need to be by yourself and touched by the world and moved. And then you'll wake up some days with everything in between. You may wake up some days a little bit irritated for no reason. People with an emotional wave have to understand that they can experience emotions that are not necessarily related to the world around them, that can just exist. And so it's not necessarily anyone's fault or your fault. It's not like you're necessarily mad because of something your friend did. You might be, but you also just might be having an emotional low that day or an emotional high that day. We usually are cool with emotional highs. Like, no, it's great that I wake up sad or really happy some days, but then like are frustrated that we have emotional lows, but it's actually just part of um, the same process. Those, Nadia, would you like to briefly explain those with an open emotional for context?
Yeah. I just want to add as you're talking, like it's mechanical. Having an emotional wave needs movement. And so people that feel frustrated being in a particular mood, be with the mood. And that is the fastest way to the other side of it. It is in and through it. It is, I know I'm feeling this way, but I'm going to move with it. I'm going to listen to an angsty song. I'm going to run and I'm going to hit the pavement and I'm going to get really angry. I'm going to get big. Like basically the goal with an emotional wave is I'm feeling this for a reason. I'm not going to intellectualize this right now. I'm just going to be with the emotional intelligence of my body. And that movement is what guides you through life. I do not have this. That's why I feel in awe of you, Sam, watching you move through this experience all the time. Um, I have an open solar plexus. In fact, when you look at my chart, I don't have a single gate defined in my solar plexus. So it's called fully open or fully undefined in human design. And I feel this very deeply. And I might express to others as very emotional because I could cry at the drop of a hat. I cry in a lot of my sessions. I know I have a lot of therapy clients, past and current, that listen to this podcast. And you know, if you work with me, like I will get teary. I will be moved very easily. I merge with people's emotional experiences. It's the most intoxicating part of being a therapist is that I get to feel so much. A Pixar movie 100% crying. I watched Soul on the plane on Sunday. Love Soul, by the way.
We
And
love that movie.
we love that movie. I can't believe it exists. Rewatching it, I'm like, I cannot believe Pixar created a full movie about spirituality and souls.
They we need to get in there and we got to if any
Yeah.
if
Let's
anyone
have a
knows
whole deep
anyone at
dive.
Pixar, can you DM us and we can have you on the podcast because we need to talk.
We need to talk. Actually, that's a great manifestation. Anyone that worked on the movie Soul, we would love to have you on the podcast. Let's talk about it. And let's have a whole podcast episode debriefing Soul.
Yes.
Anyway, I digress. I cry very easily when I'm feeling other people's feelings. When it comes to my own, when I'm by myself, I feel fairly emotionally neutral. And coming back to my emotional center is a consistent practice throughout the day because I swim in emotional waters all day long. I choose that as my work. So, cutting cords and figuring out energetically how I could stop thinking and feeling with other clients when I'm not working and I'm off the clock is a practice. Walking into a room and choosing, am I going to merge with the emotional mood of what's happening here, or am I going to create a protective bubble around myself? Um, it's just like a very interesting energetic hygiene thing. In the same way that it takes work to have an emotional wave, it takes work to have an open solar
It
plexus.
definitely does. It definitely does. And to have it open and then to choose to swim in emotional waters. So, Nadia, or anybody with an opened solar plexus, and especially one like Nadia, it's totally open. She's going in, she's picking it up. She always uses this analogy I love where you can imagine like a windmill in water, like it's picking up the water. And ideally, it picks up the water, it kind of sees what the quality of the water is that day, and then it empties it out. And that's the process that takes a skill to not hold on to it, to not view it as this is my responsibility to fix, to change, to impact, to do something about, and instead just to witness it, observe it. I love the imagery of you merging. I think that's really cool, because I think a defined solar plexus people, though they may be empathetic in other ways. I think I have a lot of empathy as a human. And I can sense other people's emotions in part because I have trained myself like that. I do not do that. I have literally cried in like 2 to 3 sessions in my entire life. And it is because somebody said something that like something so massive in their life that I felt so moved. It's actually very rare for me. I do not feel like I pick up and hold their emotions on my own.
Mhm.
And that's a huge difference. So that gives me this extra protection, but I have my own. And I think my biggest thing is I have to make sure I'm not projecting my emotions on my clients.
Yeah. And just as a it's not even a side note, but just as a continuous note of this, studying where your centers are open in human design can be so useful to
Huge.
recognize as you move through the world what you pick up. Because I had this big download. I have a very defined route, and like I don't feel people stress. Like it's very real that like that's not what I'm picking up on, but it would be useful to have a better sense as I work with clients about their nervous system regulation. So it's something that I have to ask about more. So because my whole nervous system has its own thing going on. Um, but I feel like my greatest gift as a therapist is sensing, like, as someone's talking in full monotone, they need to cry about this. They need to move something very deep. And I'm feeling it welling up in my own body right now. And sometimes just simply having that attunement, that emotional attunement from someone else is the healing,
You
to be
guys,
witnessed and met.
it's so cool to watch Nadia in action. I have watched this so many times, and it'll even happen in HCT, even though that's not as much of a therapeutic container. But someone will say something like, I had an interesting conversation with my mom today, and I'll hear it like an interesting conversation with her mom and like ask questions, and Nadia's can feel it, and she'll already start tearing up, and she'll ask a question that's so specific, and that person will immediately start crying. And it's so cool. It's like she has this extra radar sense of like beep 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 beep, there's something here. We need to, almost like an x-ray, like you have a human x-ray of the emotion, and it's like, this is where the emotion is, we need to go right into that. And all you need to do often to go into it is, one, have a safe space, and two, ask about it and speak to it. And that often is enough to allow that emotion to come up and out.
But you, Sam, work in it. You are also very masterful in the realm of emotions, but because you model it, you are so embodied. And so it's this interesting juxtaposition of like, there's still so much emotion that I have yet to experience in my own body, which sounds strange to say out loud. It's like I feel it so much from other people, but there's still so much life that I have yet to live. And yet, mm, I don't know if I would say it that way, but like,
I'll say that one of the things that benefits me so much is because I've experienced it, I can hear it often too, but it's in a different way. So
yes.
I hear it and I sense it, and I can often feel unprocessed emotion, but it is in the realm of, I know that because I've lived that, or I've seen enough clients. And then also I have a totally open spleen, which is awareness center like the solar plexus. It's about fear and anxiety, and then an open root with stress. And so a lot of times emotions are tied to fear, safety, anxiety, and stress. And so often when someone comes in and telling me about emotional experience, I won't feel the emotions like Nadia will, but I will viscerally feel my heart tight, or my throat tight, or whatever is happening in their physical body mirrored in mine, because the spleen holds the body. And then that's how I go into it. Of like, tell me
Hmm.
about, and I just know it, throat, tell me about, that, what it felt like to express this, and then it happens. And so all of this to say is, I wanted to clarify that for any practitioners out there who are like, well, I have a defined solar plexus, does that mean I can't be a therapist?
Hmm.
No, it means your gifts function differently. However, it is awesome. Like, it's a really cool skill to watch from Nadia. She's really, really good. It's really, really cool to see. But if you have a different configuration, it doesn't mean that you can't be equipped. Learning how your instrument works is important.
100,000,000%. Yes. And this is actually a really important thing to say with regards to human design, that there are a lot of people out there. I mean, our brains want black or white thinking. It's easier. It's like, this is the answer. If the formula, if you have this input, you get this output. The reality is that human design teaches your strategy, your authority, checking in with yourself. Is this a yes or a no? Is the utmost decision making point. So if you want to be a therapist and you have a defined solar plexus, I know many therapists with
Mm-hmm.
incredible therapists that way. Your inner compass does not steer you in incorrect ways. And if you hear, oh, I have a defined solar plexus and I can't do XYZ, human design is not meant to be disempowering. It's simply figuring out, as Sam said, that I'm just going to underscore because
Mm-hmm.
it's such an important point. Like,
Yeah.
your instrument will play differently, but learn how to play the hell out of that instrument.
If you have something you truly, deeply, deeply desire, then your instrument was created for that. Like, it's not a trick. Like, we would never have something in our truest heart's desire that we are just simply unequipped to ever be masterful at. It's just that your way of doing it might be different. And it's also, this speaks to why different people resonate with different types of healers, coaches, therapists, or any other of any industry practitioners, because our mechanics in our body give us different skills. And so you may be somebody that works really well with one sort of definition, and where somebody else would actually work really, really well with another sort of definition.
And I think even if you're not a coach or a therapist, any practitioner, I mean, we just interviewed like a chef on our podcast and we're so excited about that. But like any, I'm thinking of like a doctor or a nurse or somebody who works in the food industry, somebody who walks dogs. Like it doesn't matter what it is. Learning about your defined or undefined centers is really useful to figure out what am I taking in and what am I giving out.
Yes. So to this question, or this back to like the emotional wave, I do think that most people, or many people, are very dysregulated. That's a term I would use, meaning that it's difficult for them to regulate their nervous systems. It's difficult for them to stay grounded in their bodies, connected to themselves when they're out in the world connecting with different sort of people. They get triggered. They have things that remind them of their insecurities or wounds, and that puts them in a variety of emotional states. I do think, though, when people are regulated, both people with a defined emotional state will hold really big emotions, and people with an open emotional state will be more steady. Now, I think we all know people who have an open emotional, who have a sacral definition, splenic, who are highly emotional. And it's not necessarily just because they're reacting, they're like picking up and amplifying everyone else's energy. As you were referring to Nadia, I think that's part of it. It's also because they're dysregulated in their nervous system. And when somebody asks them a question, it brings up a core wound of theirs from when they're a child and they respond in a big way. And, that's just one example, but um, people can present as emotionally or not emotionally. However, in that regulated state, I do think the baseline is those who have that emotional wave will have these big experiences. Before we got on, I was telling Nadia, we were talking about this experience of like needing to pause in the day because you just need to cry. And I was like, can't even remember the last time I felt like that. And then I was like, oh wait, no, it was 2 days ago. And I was doing yard work and I literally just started crying about I'm saying it wasn't actually about being single, but I am single. So it's not like this is coming soon, but about the idea of having a partner and children and having so much love to share between your partner that you just want to pour it into children. And what a beautiful way to create a family. Someone told me that once, that her and her partner are really trying to conceive, and she's like, we just have so much love and we just want to pour it in. And I was just thinking about that, of like, what a beautiful thing. And that whole day I felt a little bit melancholy and low. I just noticed it. I cried about a few other things, can't remember what they were. And it was fine. I think I actually wrote a post. I'll probably put it on my Instagram if I go back and read it. And it's good, that like inspired me, that because I do think in my emotional lows I get like really good inspo and like I touch spiritual truths. And then I wiped my tears and I was de-weeding my yard. I went back to doing yard work, and it was totally fine. I do think that that will always be healthy for me. I don't think I'm emotionally destable. I actually think I'm very stable in my emotions, but I do experience big emotions. Nadia, what do you think it looks like as a if somebody is really regulated but has an open emotional center?
Really regulated and has an open emotional center. What do you mean? Like like the ideal state that people can get to of
Mm-hmm.
balance?
Yeah.
It's interesting. It doesn't feel like there's necessarily an arrival point. It's just recognizing. I think it's the other way. At least for me personally, it's recognizing like I am feeling something right now. It might feel eclipsed by the bigness of the emotions that I swim in of others, but can I take the time? Can I carve out the time? Um, it's interesting because I just had a recent experience of, for the first time, feeling my own emotional wave, meaning because people who have undefined solar plexuses do have emotional waves. They're just inconsistent. It's not like you're picking up on them. But when you go through big life experiences, they will show up. Emotions will show up. And I haven't experienced profound loss or grief in my life, but I did go through, and I'm going to talk about a personal example here. So if you or someone you know has experienced pregnancy loss and you feel activated by me even saying those two words, listen to your heart, pause this podcast, turn it off entirely, or come back to it at another time. But I think it's important for me to share this in the waters of cancer season, as it still feels really alive in my body. Um, So Scott and I got pregnant, and we found out on the full moon on June 21st that the pregnancy was not viable. There was all the tissue, the pregnancy tissue was there, but there was no embryo. And it's interesting because before I had this miscarriage, I talked to myself about it. I intellectualized it, and I was like, it's so interesting. People get really emotional about miscarriages. I think I'd feel okay if this happened. I think I'd feel trust in my partnership that we try again. I was very logical about it. But when it actually happened to me, and the doctor was telling me during the ultrasound, like, we don't see any baby here, we're going to have to talk about our options for aborting and basically getting rid of the tissue in your body. I felt stunned in the moment, and then as soon as we got into the car in the parking lot, I started sobbing. And for the first time in my life, my emotional body felt very different from my logical mind. There has never been a time in my life before where I've had to take a time out from my activities and notice I need to sob. I need to put myself in a room and just cry by myself. Um, and it was so humbling. And the initial message I heard was, this is going to make you such a wonderful mother when that time comes. Like, you're going to feel such deep reverence for the process of creating life in your body. And also that I'd be a better therapist. Not that there has to be a reason why. And in the wake of this experience, in the first few weeks, I mean, it's only been a couple weeks.
Very recent.
We're, yeah, we're recording this in the beginning of July, but sometimes I would want Scott to hold me as I cried, and sometimes I just wanted to not be touched at all and fully be in the experience. It's very isolating to have something happen in your body that nobody else can quite feel in the way that you can. You know, we're very spiritual, Sam. We believe in oneness. We are all one organism. And also, it's the illusion of separateness in those moments where you're going through physical pain is so real. And so I just needed to be kind of like alone and cocooned in my room. And I felt myself shrinking away from telling people, feeling so embarrassed that we told people that we were pregnant at all and that we'd have to tell them this was a failed attempt. And even that word failure, that failed attempt, I was so ashamed to tell people, which is so wild, but it was such an emotional response. But then the outpouring of love that came through was so important to feel. Um, and I really get the analogy of grief coming in waves where it like would swell up within me and I'd feel myself getting short with Scott, which is what I talked about earlier. And then as soon as I recognized, like, actually, I just really need to cry right now, I would let it out. And it was different than any cries I've had before because I've had some like ugly cries. Like, do you see the memes of Kim Kardashian where
Yeah.
she's like, wow, like scream crying? Like, I've had those before. But this was different. It was like a very soft, noiseless, just like cry. And I've just never felt that before. Of like, it's so hard to even put into words because it's just a body-based experience. And even when I was like, all right, I'm over it, like I'm ready to move on with my life and like, you know, have the summer that this other summer and but still my body would bring me back into like, this is not done. You have not felt the fullness of this. Oh, and I just like after each cry, I'd feel so much better. It's like so unequivocally good for you to feel it. So,
Mm. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you for bringing this here. Um, I really, really like your point about the intellectualizing it. And I want to go into this a little bit more early on in the miscarriage, like within 24 hours. You had said something to me about, like, this is going to make me a better mother and a better therapist. And I think your ability to open to pain and to grasp for silver linings and to grasp for meaning is beautiful. And I think it's a beautiful thing that humans do. And I think it can be, and it's true, and those things are true. And I think it can be a part of our brain trying to make sense of a painful experience and organizing it. And you're speaking to this wisdom that it almost felt like you were kind of like forced into, of like, you have to just open to this. Like, you have to open to this grief. I remember you sharing with me at some point that it was a really wild experience because your brain and your mind knew like this was going to be okay, but your body was swimming in such deep waters of grief. And I want to know, for anybody who's experienced pregnancy loss, but also anybody who's just had this experience of like, my emotion is so big and it's overtaking me. And my mind is trying to, it's almost like a bucket of water that's overfilling. And my mind's trying to like keep all the water in, but it can't because it's spilling out everywhere. How you just surrendered to the like, let it pour out of me.
Right. And that's where I got to is my mind immediately tried to make sense and exactly what you're saying. Like this is such a disorganized, chaotic experience. I didn't even us getting pregnant was so sudden and so yeah. And when I just surrendered to it, like Scott would ask me like, oh, he'd see me crying and kind of like not know what to do, but then, like kind of ask like, what is it? And I'm like, honestly, it's just sad. Like it's just sad. And I'm just feeling the fullness of my body's sadness right now. And I think it's like such a healing experience to just feel things without needing to intellectualize them at all. And it's such a beautiful thing. And this is the first time in my life that I felt the truth of my emotional body and that there's wisdom in it. And that if I can feel it fully now, um, it won't get stuck somewhere. And and just that like emotions can feel so frustrating to the mind that wants to just move forward and be done, and yet like could I really trust that like my body's ability to feel this much is just love in another form?
It's just love in another form. And it's love that was going somewhere that now is redirecting for now.
For now.
For now. One of the things it sounds like Scott was kind of like, okay, how do I support somebody moving through such a big emotion that can't be fixed? Like many emotions can't be fixed, but especially this experience. There is no fix, there's no solution. It's just allowing. And that I think is like the true surrender to the emotional body, is like allowing it to be here. And of course, there's things you can do. There's steps along the way you can look forward to, and there's ways to support the body, but you can't fix it. And what was that like? Like how did you navigate that?
Just really getting in touch with my emotional body. There's so much intelligence of what it needs. And so some days, like the first couple days, we ordered a ton of Indian food and just watched like literally 10 hours of The Office 2 days in a row. Like we were just fully comatose. And that's what I needed. Like I needed to cocoon. I needed to that show is so poignant, The Office, by the way. I love it so much. It's like hilarious, but
It's
also there's
so
like
funny.
these beautiful moments of emotional poignancy, and that's exactly what I needed to like remember how to laugh, but also in those moments like I was sobbing when Michael left the office, the episode. Like it was the perfect thing, and that's what I needed. But some days I needed to kind of get a kick in the butt and remember like to get out of the house, to remember what it feels like to be in my groove, and um not push to, it's such an art form to know how to be at your edge, and also know when to take it really slow and soft. And so that
How,
shifts.
how did you tell? How could you know?
It's so hard to put into words. Again, my intellectual mind is grasping to like find the right words and organize this experience, but it was unlike anything I've ever experienced before. Like such a viscerally felt like, oh, that doesn't feel good. Ah, that feels really good. Like, oh, this is right at the edge of what I need. Oh, this is too sharp. And I need to retreat back. And yeah, I'm curious if you have an answer for that in terms of what feels right.
I think what you're saying is right, which is it's intuitive, and you experiment and you ask your body a lot and you say, okay, like you essentially have a conversation like, what do you need today? Do you want to go out? Are you hungry? Like, do you want to burrow? And you see what comes up, and then you try it, and then you see how it feels. And you can start to tell, like, when it's like I've been lying down for so long and it's starting to feel stagnant. It's not really starting to feel nourishing. It's starting to feel like numbing, and it's a different energy. And this is a time then like in that case, like let's stretch it a bit. Let's go on a walk and see how that feels. Okay, then it feels better. And then you start to kind of know your own rhythms. So it builds over time. It's an intelligence. Part of the surrendering to the emotional intelligence is surrendering to the feelings greater than what the mind can grasp. But I do think it can change really quickly. And often I find that my body will start to tell me when a big emotion is coming. Um, like my heart will get really tight around my heart. Like it'll literally feel like I can't fully inhale. And
Mm.
then I'll tap on it and I breathe into it. I'm like, okay, what's here? And I start to sense like if something's really tight around my heart, there's an emotion I need to process, versus other parts of the body that might just be like sore and physically tired. I notice now when I need to move, my muscles get sore and like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's a sensation that I finally have been able to match with I need to move. It kind of feels like I need to stretch. It's like that sensation of being on a long plane. And I get that in the mornings that I know I need to work out, which is now with a lot of frequency. So if I go more than like 2 days, I'll feel it. And so when I'm lying on the couch, if I feel that sensation, then I'm like, even if I'm sad, I need to get out.
Mm. That's really helpful actually to hear the words that you're using to describe it. I would almost like equate it for me as like you're eating and you're really hungry and it just feels so good. It's like you're nourishing your body and you're like, hell yeah, I don't want to be doing anything else. This meal is just like so good. But then you get to a point of satiation and it's no longer feeling good because and having that intelligence with your body is so interesting. And I've just never had such an emotional experience where I had to tap in like that. And I'm not through it. And I think that the recording of this podcast episode is intentional. That like it's not an open like wound for me right now. And I want to clarify for people listening, I am deeply supported. I don't need you can reach out to me if you'd like to, but I don't need any support. This is purely coming from a place of like field notes of like, holy crap, I went through this experience that was so emotionally big, and I've never had to like regulate and self soothe myself through an experience like this before.
Nadia, would you be open to sharing a little bit how Instagram felt?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a really important thing actually, that there was this deep intuitive knowing the day that we had our appointment that I needed to shut down all Instagram. And so I apologize if anyone's messaged me. I still haven't gotten back on my business Instagram. I shut down my personal Instagram. I actually just re-downloaded it yesterday, my personal one. Um, but I mean, I've had a challenging relationship with Instagram for a long time, and I think it's such a like psychological like minefield to make sure that you can stay on Instagram and posting content in a way that you don't get sucked into comparison or the vortex of, you know, this person's doing this thing and am I enough and just questions of inadequacy. But I don't even know if I can put it into words, but it was like a as soon as we received the news, it went fully like cocoon, and Instagram was a hard no, like not even a question. As it's almost like you receive a diagnosis and you have to get as healthy as possible, and you're like, I can't have this pack of cigarettes a day. Like that's like it felt like junk food, um, and harmful actually. And it's confusing for me because Instagram is a fantastic tool for business and a fantastic tool to stay connected to people, and that's why I re-downloaded it personally. But it was yeah, I think I've said enough there. Just like notice what feels really like a hard no and like it's painful for you in the wake of whatever you're experiencing.
The emotional body is so extremely intelligent. And sometimes it doesn't feel intelligent because it can be reactive. And it can, for those of us with an emotional wave, it's like, I'm happy for no reason, I'm sad for no reason. Like, how intelligent is it? But actually, there is so much intelligence in there. And part of that intelligence told you we're very energetically sensitive. We are psychologically and emotionally sensitive. Your hormones are going through a lot. Like we cannot have other people's energies, and probably a lot of other reasons. But it told you. Like I feel like it was very emotional body led, and the emotions are stored in the body. So we talk about the emotional body, but it's also the physical body, and they're extremely connected. And so they can speak to each other. So your body might not want something, but it'll communicate out through an emotion, and vice versa.
It's so wild, honestly, because I know that and I've intellectually known that for a long time, but now I've experienced it firsthand. And it's you said something before, like earlier, that was so profound, which is that in your emotional lows you touch into spiritual truths. I think, is that the way that you said it?
Yes. Yeah.
And I, yeah, I've been off of posting on my like um my podcast for a really long time. I've been out of my writing practice. I love morning pages. Shout out to the Artist Way. And as
We love
soon as this
Julia
happened,
Cameron.
we love Julia Cameron. And Julia Cameron, if you want to come on the pod, we'd love to have you.
Please.
We're just manifesting everything today. It is the gate of beginnings. So just saying. Anyway, as soon as this happened, I was more creatively inspired than I felt in a long time. And I was like, I got into this weird spiritual thing of like, if I live a spiritual life, like subconsciously, bad, quote unquote, bad things, challenging things, difficult things won't happen to me. And I realized that that bubble was popped in that moment of like, this, is this happening to me? Like hearing the words, you're miscarrying. I was like, what? And then it was this real deeper truth of, of course, challenging things are meant to happen. Of course, you're meant to go through difficult times. That connects you with the fabric of humanity and your own emotions. And also, I think that that's actually the reason why I didn't want to go on Instagram, is because for better or for worse, it's where people share these are all the things that are happening that are going really well in my life. And it does its job of staying connected, helping people stay connected. But as I was moving through such a real human low experience, I was like, that's not the place for me to find solace and connectedness.
And you have exhibited, even though you had intellectualized it, like you had to put it to practice and you did it excellently. Like you put this to practice and you move through it with so much grace and so much honoring and having to do something you've never done before and crushed. Like you
I feel like you're like,
just
yes, like
inappropriate.
young
Just like that.
grasshopper, like you.
But there is a, you know, to anyone out there, there's no right or wrong way to experience a miscarriage or to experience loss. But what I'm getting at here is that it's very brave to be willing to lean into emotions at that level and at that deep, and to go through something that's innately can make you feel helpless, if anything, to your emotions, and to be able to discern and identify this is what I need, and to be and to not judge yourself, or even if you do it anyway, of like, I need to get off this platform right now. I can't handle people who share good news. Like right now I need to watch The Office. Right now I need to go work out. Like whatever it is. We spoke about this before we started recording, but there is no one miscarriage experience or one any big emotional experience. And I think the challenging part and the brave part is allowing yourself to have the experience that you're actually having and opening to it. And so on some days that's deep grief, and on some days it might actually be like you're feeling pretty good and vibrant and positive, and giving yourself permission to have that experience too.
There's so many things I want to respond to that with. Um, but I think an important piece here is, and then I think we should wrap up this conversation, just from a timing perspective. But I just want to say, like, there are very real collective emotional experiences that one taps into. And what I felt viscerally as I went through this portal is I could actually feel connected to all the uterus carrying humans who have miscarried before. Like I felt more than just the emotional experience that I was having. I felt like, holy whoa, it's this underbelly of something that happens very commonly. 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in a miscarriage. It is so common, and yet I have heard so few stories about it. Um, People don't talk about it very often. And I felt in this moment like this is so big, and it's this like secret wave almost. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. It absolutely makes sense. And I haven't had that with miscarriage, but I've had that experience before of something that was so big for me, and feeling how common this was. I think of it with like feeling being unsafe with men and like attacks, and being like, majority of women experience something like this. And this was so big for me, which means that everybody's carrying something that's so big and yet it's not coming out. And that means it's just in pain. Um, One thing I would like to touch on before we close this is shame. And so you are one, sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. And that means speaking of things that can be shameful. And you had referenced this of it felt shameful to have miscarried. It told people, and now you're speaking about it. Probably, you know, it wasn't that long ago that you felt that shame. And so, what helped you in it? And if there's anything you want to speak to about what you learned about shame with pregnancy loss.
I mean, I feel like we sound maybe like a broken record, but people might not have heard us say this before, but we say this to each other all the time of like the greatest liberation that shame has is just speaking it. And that's why therapists and coaches exist, and having a professional clinician there with you to witness. And that's why it works, because when your experience is shared with another human, it is no longer stuck inside your own body, believing the illusion that you are alone in this experience. Like that's what shame wants you to think, that no one's ever thought or felt or acted in this way before. It's only you. And so when you speak it, you connect to this web, this like mycelial network of all humanity. And I love, I've had this whole philosophical thing of like, why do I feel the need to share on podcasts? Is this egotistical? But I can feel the purity of this in this moment, that the reason why I do this is because I feel this liberation. Like, it's not that this experience won't be in me emotionally anymore, but it's very much like this experience is big sharing it here. And I feel the like, uh, as soon as it's out, it's like, oh, it's not as big as I thought, actually. It's still big, and also it's so connected to the human experience. And um yeah, I'm wondering if you could put that into different words
Yeah,
in your experience.
I think by sharing it out, I my life has been transformed from by sharing challenging experiences publicly. And it has given me so much freedom and it allows it to take up a lot less space in my body. So one, it makes a lot more room for other things, which is great, and other things that I want, like joy or hope or support. And then two, it alchemizes or transforms the nature of how big it was. And so even if it is still a very big experience, it goes from one where there's a shadow on it, or there's an energy of I did something wrong, or this is bad, or I'm not whole in some way, to this is a part of what of my life experience, and it was a true part and a painful part and a teaching part, and I don't have to feel worse about myself because I lived and I've walked a path, and in fact I am, in part all these things are shaping me all the time, and I can feel a strength from them rather than a feeling like there's something about me that is bad and people can't see it, otherwise they wouldn't love or like me as much.
Hmm. And you can protect your heart to know who the right people are to share and in what timing. You might take a long time to share, or it might feel like only with professionals that where confidentiality is held does it feel safe in your life to share. Like really trust your intuition, and the emotional body and what it has to say. But it's not dissimilar from the emotional wave of like when you keep your story to yourself and these shameful parts, it owns you. When you move it in a way outside of yourself, when it's witnessed, when it's liberated from your body, it no longer owns you. It no longer defines you. It is a piece. And I also think that this podcast is an offering, Sam.
Mm-hmm.
It's from our hearts, it's shared freely. And there's something about sharing these deep human experiences that is I don't know how to put it into words, but I'm just seeing the visual of like we're like sending out love and loving vibrations. We're contributing in some way. We're sending it back out. Like it's like this experience happened and we're creating from it. It's a creative process.
It is a creative process. And when I had a really very, very challenging experience, is one of the most of my life. Actually, we're almost coming up on the 2-year anniversary of it. And I was talking to one of my healers and my coaches about it, Danny. And um, it was kind of the nature of this where I was like, I don't want to ever suggest that this was happening for a reason. You know, it was one of those things where like it's not I don't want to suggest it's happening for a reason because it was violent in nature, but it did happen. And so now how do I make sense of it in my life? And she told me, Sam, we're all on the ground floor of earth and of life, and you will run into life. Life will run into you. And when that happens, you can either open to it or you can close to it. And opening to it makes meaning out of it and allows love to flow in. And I'm almost seeing, and closing to it is the shame and the keeping it in, and it's hiding from it. And it can feel safer in the moment because the emotion of that collision can be so intense and so big, but it actually disconnects you. And what I believe happens from a spiritual perspective is when we open to life, which is through the process of the deep feeling, and it's through the process of shining the light on any part of us that feels ashamed for the experience that we're having or the emotional reaction that we're having to it. We literally allow love to flow into our body at a deeper level. It's like it breaks us because it's breaking off pieces of us, and then it's opening. And I think of like a pipe that gets like gunk in it, and you are clearing out the gunk, and the love that flowing through that pipe is touching places it never has gotten to touch before because you opened it at a deeper level. And in that touching of it, that's where we touch the spiritual truth. It's like, wow, love has never reached this deep before. Like, I've never
Mm.
opened this much to life. And in that, we get things. And that's why it can feel like when these really challenging things happen, that there's this like deeper meaning of it because like we got to make a contact with love, with divine love in a way that we hadn't before. And that alone gives purpose.
Mm. I'm crying. It's like even this, even here, there is love. It's so profound. Thank you for sharing that, Sam. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for opening up this space. It feels very sacred. Um, and thank you if you're listening all the way through to the end of this episode. You're connected with us through the ethers. Um, know that we are deeply grateful, and we're just sending you love wherever you are in your life. Um, Even if it feels like it's dark or it's hard, like, can you find love even there?
Thank you, Nadia, for sharing. And thank you for being willing and open to modeling this and modeling what it means to express and what it means to let love in at that level and sharing that as a service for us. And thank you. Or I just want to, yeah, share a thank you to all the mothers, Divine Goddess and Mother Earth, and but specifically the human mothers who have carried babies in their wombs, that have lost babies, that haven't felt supported at times in their motherhood. Um, there is so much strength and love that is born from you.
And so it is. Thank you, Sam.